Weaponizing wheat. Why Ukrainian grain is suddenly so divisive in Europe. War and the damage it caused. How long can Russia keep fighting in Ukraine? Hungarians ask for protection from Ukrainian Nazism, and Zelensky appropriates US aid. Break the fake with our partners from StopFake. You're watching Spotlight Ukraine, trans-world politics and deep analytics made by the Ukrainian journalists to the whole globe. My name is Volodymyr Stapchuk. More details right now.
I visited both Kherson and Luhansk regions. There are a lot of issues there. I will not go back to them. The purpose of the trip was to meet with the military officers.
No ships have gotten out of Ukraine, and more than 50 have been blocked from going in to load up. Countries around the world depend on this life-saving grain. Russia is breaking its promises to them.
Russia's war against Ukraine has provoked a food crisis in the world. To ease Western sanctions, the aggressor is resorting to grain blackmail. Ukraine is one of the world's largest wheat exporters, and Russia is using this to its advantage. The Black Sea Initiative for the export of Ukrainian grain has become an instrument of the strategy. On the one hand, Russia does not seem to refuse to provide a sea corridor for food, but it comes up with ultimatums and blackmails with conditions. And as a result, Ukraine is forced to look for alternative routes for grain exports, which has caused protest from European farmers. Details right now.
Kilometer-long queues of trucks formed at the exit from Ukraine to Poland. Traffic across the border was paralyzed by the decision to temporarily ban imports of agricultural products from Ukraine. On April 15th, this decision was made by the Polish government, followed by Hungary and Slovakia.
We are standing in the queue. It expands to about 25 kilometers. When I reached this place here, we are standing exactly here for 3 days already.
The European Commission estimates that farmers in Poland, Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria and Slovakia lost 417 million euros from the influx of cheaper Ukrainian grain that reached them only because of the war. By blocking ports in the Black Sea, Russia forced Ukraine to look for new ways to export through Europe to its markets in Africa and Middle East. However, clever businessmen decided to capitalize on this, and the grain settled in European countries, threatening their markets. Consequently, Poland even banned the transit of crops through its territory, but the parties managed to resolve this issue.
I am very pleased because we managed to come up with such mechanisms that will ensure that not a single ton of grain will remain in Poland. For a certain amount of time, there will be an escort of every transport through Poland. Tax and customs officials, as well as other services, will escort shipments to the place where they should go. That means either over Polish border or to Polish ports.
The transit corridor was reopened on April the 21st. It is extremely important for Ukraine, as Russia has been manipulating the grain deal in an effort to ease European sanctions. The agreement, mediated by the UN and Turkey, allowed for 120 days of grain exports from 3 Ukrainian ports in Odessa region. On March the 18th, the parties extended the agreement, but it is unclear for how long. Ukraine says it is again for 120 days. Russia says it is only for 60 days, but it still does not fulfill the conditions. On April the 17th, the terrorist country blocked inspections of 50 ships carrying Ukrainian grain that were moving through Turkish territorial waters of the Bosphorus.
That's why it's extremely important for us to unblock grain transit through Europe. Otherwise, Ukraine will remain blocked, and we, together with our friends and partners, must not allow Russia to take advantage of this situation.
Russia's sabotage of the grain deal has reduced the volume of Ukrainian exports by almost half, which does not contribute to global food stability, the experts emphasize. Before the invasion, Ukraine was one of the world's leading grain exporters.
Ambassador-at-Large of the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Doctor of Agricultural Sciences, Olga Trofimtseva, joins me now. Hello and welcome to Spotlight Ukraine.
Good afternoon.
Pleased to meet you. So Poland, Slovakia and Hungary say they're banning the import and transit of grain from Ukraine to protect their own agricultural sectors. It comes after local farmers complained of grain coming from the war-torn country being sold below market price. Let's listen what Ukrainian farmers have to say.
We are facing difficult situation today. Price for petrol has risen. Price for pesticides has risen. Mineral fertilizers, I cannot even tell you how much the price for them has risen. They make the main chunk in the expenses. That's why it is not easy for us these days. I would like farmers and agricultural lobby in the eastern countries to understand that we face similar problems. We don't ask for subsidies. We don't want anything like that. Just help us to sell our goods.
Is it time for unilateral and unjustified import bans on Ukrainian grain right now?
Thank you for the question and thank you for this topic raising in Spotlight, because the issue is really very important. And as we see the whole attention from the media and from the farmers, not only in Ukraine but in neighboring countries, is drawn to this issue in the latest day. But I must say that the situation has developed not only recently, but rather in during the months since the autumn of 2022, where were already first signs of worrying signs from the Romanian and Polish farmers who were actually not very pleased by the situation, this transit of Ukrainian grain through their countries. And here we come into one of the factors which played quite an important role in this situation which we have right now in these days. This is the so-called bottleneck, these European Union logistics and infrastructure systems, which were not very good coping with all the volumes of grains and oilseeds which came from Ukrainian side after the liberalization of the trade regime proposed by the European or imposed by the European Commission. And the second also objective factor which we have here in place, you mentioned that Ukraine or Ukrainian farmers and exporters, like it seems from the European side, are selling their grain with some sort of discount. Well, it's not really true, because Ukrainian grain is historically quite competitive from their price point of view. And what we've seen again in the latest month on the world markets, if we analyze the price development, we see that the prices have gone down, unfortunately. And as it seems again, the Polish and Romanian or Slovakian farmers were expecting higher prices at the beginning of this season of spring 2023. So in general, we can understand, definitely we can understand all the difficulties and challenges that which the Eastern European farmers are coping right now. But we shouldn't forget who or what is the primary source of all these worries and challenges, not only for Ukraine, but again now for the European Union and for European Union agricultural producers. This is definitely only Russia and Russian aggression, because without Russian aggression and full-scale war and invasion in Ukraine, we wouldn't have such a difficult situation in our own agriculture in Ukraine, and we wouldn't have such a situation right now at Ukrainian-European Union borders. Again, here is, I think, this all these protests and all these worries of the Eastern European farmers, it's rather about the worsen towards the Brussels and towards the European Union, and European Commission, because I know during my talks with different agricultural stakeholders in both in Poland or in other European countries, I've heard that, the need for more flexible, for faster actions is clearly needed in case of the European Commission, because many of the steps are quite bureaucratic and take a long time. Yeah.
In early April, coinciding with the protests by farmers in Ukraine's western neighbors, Russia began to more actively block the inspection of ships carrying the Ukrainian grain. And later, it unilaterally stopped registering ships leaving Ukrainian ports as part of the grain initiative. So what is the future of this agreement, and what can Ukrainian farmers hope for in this situation?
Yeah, what a coincidence, right? You're absolutely right. Unfortunately, Russia all the time is pressuring and trying to blackmail the activities within their grain initiative, which was signed in late July last year. And to tell the truth, we didn't expect anything else from the terrorist state like Russia in this sense. What we are doing, we are combining our efforts both from Ukrainian side, from Ukrainian ministries and different institutions who are involved in the work of this grain corridor, together with our international partners, first of all, definitely Turkey and the United Nations. And what we're trying to do, we are trying to now to form a very clear and firm position as for the Russian demands, because all what we are doing right now with all this silent sabotage, as I name it, of the work of the grain corridor, we are trying to ease the international financial sanctions, first of all on banks. Russian banks, including the largest agricultural bank, Rossельhozbank of Russia. And we're trying in this way to put under pressure all the participants of the grain corridor. But as we've seen already in November of 2022, all the participants of this initiative are clearly on a position that grain corridor should work stable and sustainable, because it's not only about the survival or not about the critical situation for Ukrainian agricultural producers, farmers, from the small ones to the medium and large ones. It's about the food security worldwide. And the latest news again, which I read just today, the World Food Program of United Nations is saying that up to 48 million people in Africa in the next couple of months are just in acute danger of the famine and hunger. And at the same time, what we are seeing that Russia is using their food and food security issues, including food exports from Ukraine, as a weapon.
Yeah, well spotted, really well spotted. During the Russian aggression, the significant part of Ukraine has become a minefield. This not only makes movement difficult, but also causes serious disruption to agriculture, one of the main sectors of the Ukrainian economy. What is going to be harvested, and will there be enough to go around?
Yeah, there will be enough of grain and oilseeds, definitely. So there is no worry about the food security, at least for Ukraine. But when we are talking again about the global aspects of the food security, we should really think about the export ways and export routes for Ukrainian food to get out of our country, because we are producing much more when we need it for the domestic consumption, both for food and feed. And that's why it's important right now to provide for our farmers not only the possibility to go in the fields and work, so to demine fields, for instance, in a southern part of Ukraine. We know that very actively the work's now underway to the mining fields in Kherson region, in Zaporizhia region. Every day, this service teams are working there to help farmers. But the second thing is then Ukrainian farmers are again effectively and productively grow the crops on their fields in this dangerous situation, despite all the challenges and growing prices of the inputs for their production. The issue of the exports of these products, both by the seaways, by their sea routes through the Black Sea, and by on ground ways through the European Union, so-called solidarity lanes. This is the main issue. So we really hope that during next several months, the active negotiations between Ukraine, European Union, between Turkey, Ukraine, and United Nations will take place to assure more or less stable, how it could be in this situation under the Russian aggression, more or less stable work of the export routes for Ukrainian most important food staples for world markets.
And by the way, I got some figures to strengthen just your statements. The World Food Programme reports that 382 million people in 82 countries are currently experiencing acute food insecurity, and describes the current situation as the global hunger crisis of unprecedented proportions. If the agreement is not renewed, then what?
Well, this is a big question. Everybody now is discussing the latest, one of the latest, let's say, blackmailing letters of Russia to the coordination center in Istanbul, where we're saying that, yeah, we agreed for a prolonging of the grain initiative only till 18th of May, no longer, if no concessions in financial sanctions against Russia will be somehow met. So everybody is now asking what will happen after 18th of May, when, for instance, Russia will say, "But well, we are not agree with working of the grain initiative without Russian participation in this inspection teams, etc." Again, we remember the situation in November of 2022. Then there more or less similar situation happened, and we had experienced the same demarche of the Russian participants or Russian representatives there. And what we've seen that thanks to the very firm and very clear position of Turkey at that moment, Russia was actually forced to backtrack their decision, and just after a day or two, they said, well, okay, if you are saying that you are working without us, we are coming back. So will they try somehow some military actions again, commercial ships with loaded with grain? Mm-hmm. I don't think so, to tell the truth. But again, we are dealing here with a terrorist state. We cannot even predict any kind of we cannot predict what we're capable of. So from the beginning of this grain initiative signing, we were saying that, well, any kind of negative surprises actually are possible, unfortunately, due to participation of Russia in this agreement.
But still, let's be optimistic. Thank you so much, and Slava Ukraini.
Heroям slava.
Ambassador at Large of the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Doctor of Agricultural Sciences, Olga Trofimtseva, was the guest of Spotlight Ukraine. The terrible figures of Russia's war against Ukraine. 150,000 destroyed residential buildings, more than 1,000 lost shrines and cultural heritage sites, 550 destroyed educational institutions, and more than 100 hospitals. And this is just a small list of what the occupiers have destroyed in Ukraine over the year and 2 months of the full-scale war. But while the buildings can still be rebuilt, the lives of the killed and tortured Ukrainians cannot be returned. The price we are paying in the fight against Russian terrorism is in the next story.
Borodyanka is in ruins even a year after the deoccupation. This village is one of the most destroyed in the Kiev region. The Russians entered here on February the 26th. The locals did not have time to leave because the village was intensively shelled by the enemy aircraft. People hid in basements that became their mass graves. After Borodyanka was liberated, 41 bodies were pulled from the rubble.
We ran out and looked at the center of the house. It was on fire. It was still standing. Part of the structure was still holding on from the outside, but there was a terrible scream of a small child. And it all collapsed before our eyes. A lot of people were in their apartments. Some of them, even my neighbors, ran with a small child to the entrance and ended up in this very place where the bomb hit. The whole family was killed, a little girl and a man with his wife.
Natalia lost her husband and brother in this way. A Russian missile hit their apartment.
It happened on March the 2nd last year. We survived because we were sent to the village of Myrcha, where my friend lived. We stayed at her place and they went home. When Borodyanka was liberated in April, they started to dismantle the rubble.
Shortly after the deoccupation of Borodyanka, mysterious graffiti appeared on the ruins, as if symbolizing a destroyed peaceful life. Later, a photo of one of them was posted on social media by the famous British street artist Banksy, who confirmed it to be his work. The house itself will have to be demolished, but the graffiti is going to be saved.
You can see the state of the building. In order to save it somehow, we need to fix the graffiti in a capsule and manually disassemble the entire building.
More than $140 million is needed to restore the village, the authorities estimated. During the month of occupation, almost every other house in Borodyanka was destroyed. And there are dozens of such settlements during the year of full-scale war in Ukraine. There are also many that ceased to exist. Only the name is left. Before the Russian invasion, the town of Mariinka, on the outskirts of Donetsk, was home to 10,000 people. Now there is not a single resident and not a single surviving house. In Donetsk region, Volnovaha, Vuhledar, Liman, Soledar and Bakhmut were almost completely destroyed. Mariupol has seen catastrophic destruction. The Luhansk region is in ruins. Severodonetsk, Popasna, Rubizhne, Счастье and Kreminna. In the combat zone, the occupiers used their scorched earth tactics and shock with their atrocious treatment of not only captured Ukrainian soldiers, but also civilians.
It is impossible to describe what we did when we entered Soledar and Bakhmut. We were given the command to clean up and kill everyone. There were women, men, children, pensioners. Do you realize what is on these hands? She was screaming, a small child. She was 5 or 6 years old, and I shot her. I shouldn't have let anyone out. There were about 40 children. In total, there were about 300-400 people. I had no way out. I couldn't do anything. I gave the command to kill them all.
According to the UN, more than 8,000 Ukrainian civilians were killed during this war, in particular almost 500 children. But these are only documented figures. The real number is much higher. It is currently unknown how many civilians died in Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, Popasna and Volnovaha. Mariupol, that's another story. According to rough estimates, about 20,000 citizens were killed in active hostilities last spring.
I know it's too emotional, but still we have to continue. And I'm here to announce my next guest, the former NATO Secretary General, George Robertson, who joins me now. Hello and welcome to Spotlight Ukraine.
Hello, good evening.
Pleased to meet you. And the first question, Jens Stoltenberg visited Ukraine for the first time since the full-scale invasion. And this was a few weeks before the expected counteroffensive of the Ukrainian army. So what do you think the NATO leader brought to Kyiv? And perhaps something that should not be discussed on the phone?
What he brought was a sense of solidarity with the people and the government of Ukraine. But he also brought a sense of unity between the NATO nations, the 31 countries of NATO who stand in absolute solidarity with Ukraine at this difficult time. There is no doubt at all that Vladimir Putin believed at the beginning of this exercise that he could divide the Europeans, from the United States, and that he could somehow stop the onward march of NATO membership. In all three areas, he's catastrophically been wrong. NATO is now bigger and it is stronger. Europe is more united than it ever has been before. And the United States and Europe are welded together in a determination to make sure that Ukraine prevails.
By the way, in one of the first interviews after you had been elected as NATO Secretary General in 2009, you said that you would like to improve the alliance's relations with Russia. If you have been elected the Secretary General of NATO now in 2023, what would you say about the alliance's relations with Russia?
Well, I was appointed in 1999 after the liberation of Kosovo in the former Yugoslavia at that time. And yes, at that time we wanted and were very keen to establish a good relationship with Russia. And in the early stages, we had a good relationship with Vladimir Putin. And I had a cordial relationship in terms of the partnership that was established, especially after 9/11. And we created at the NATO-Russia summit in May of 2002 a new council, a NATO-Russia council. And Vladimir Putin that day signed the Rome Declaration, which committed Russia to recognizing the territorial integrity of all countries. Indeed, he stood beside me at the press conference following the summit meeting, and he said the following words, and I quote him directly: "Ukraine is a sovereign, independent nation state, and it will make its own decisions about security." That is what he said in 2002, but he has betrayed that sentiment, betrayed that promise, as well as breaking the United Nations Charter, the Helsinki Accords, the Budapest Memorandum, and the Rome Declaration itself. So if I was to be appointed to be the Secretary General of NATO today, my primary purpose, as it is with Jens Stoltenberg, is to make sure that the people of Ukraine are able to defend the sovereign territory of their country, and that NATO would side with them and stand with them at this terrible time.
Thank you. In one of your interviews with Deutsche Welle, you also said that we should expect more provocations from Russia. So what kind of provocations did you mean there?
I think that undoubtedly Russia will use provocations in terms of violence, in terms of attacks, in terms of surprises, and we should be ready for that. That's the nature of this particular conflict. But we need to be prepared, and we need to have the proper toolkit to be able to deal with any surprise provocations that come to us. And that is why it is so important that Ukraine and Ukrainians get the ammunition, they get the missiles, they get the equipment in order to make sure that they can confront the Russian military effort at this present time. We need to be ready and prepared for a number of surprises. But up to now, the Ukrainian forces have been remarkably resilient and inventive and successful.
Thank you. And now let's talk a bit about the strategic issues. So The Russian invasion of Ukraine revolutionizes the NATO military strategy. Shocked by the Russian atrocities, NATO is becoming the war-fighting alliance it was during the Cold War, committed to defending every inch of its territory from day one. That's my colleagues from New York Times declared. And NATO is an organization that took a holiday from history. Do you agree with this statement?
No, I don't. I think that there were times, certainly, where we hoped for the best. We were more optimistic than perhaps we should have been. But I think in the early stages of our relationship with Russia, there was a possibility of getting Vladimir Putin and the leadership of the Russian Federation to recognize that they had common enemies, common problems, common difficulties, and that cooperating with NATO was in the interests of the Russian Federation as a whole. So no, I think that there were times when perhaps we were optimistic, but we had good reason to be optimistic. It was not wishful thinking. It was a pragmatic view which was betrayed because Vladimir Putin made a decision that he was going to try and eliminate his next door country. I had a lot of good relationships with Ukraine at that time, with the leadership of Ukraine, then President Yanukovych, who was the regional governor of Donetsk, when I visited him for the first occasion, with President Kuchma and with the Ukrainian leadership. And we did actually foresee the possibility that we could build a sensible, worthwhile, practical relationship with Russia that would have contained Russia and made it a partner. But we were frustrated because Putin had decided on an imperialist objective, ambition, and that is what destroyed our hopes.
How long can Russia keep fighting the war in Ukraine? What do you think?
I don't know how long they can keep fighting. It's very difficult for them at the moment. Pretty well all of their strategic objectives have been failed. They are running out of troops. They're running out of precision weapons. And they're digging in defensively and perhaps now resorting to the tactics they used in Syria, simply of blitzkrieg and the destruction of property. But, you know, things can happen. There is a dynamic involved in the world. Russia, when it was the Soviet Union, came out of Afghanistan overnight. They decided they couldn't win. It was costing money. It was costing people. And they made the decision to abandon their mission in Afghanistan. So, you know, I hope that Vladimir Putin now recognizes that he cannot and will not win this conflict with Ukraine and the whole of the West, and will recognize that and stop the fighting.
Thank you so much. Thank you once again. That was the former NATO Secretary General George Robertson, the guest of Spotlight Ukraine. Thank you so much and see ya. And now let's see the losses of Ukraine in this brutal war.
Almost $140 billion in losses have already been documented in Ukraine from the Russian invasion. According to preliminary estimates, Ukraine's GDP declined by more than 30% last year, and the inflation rate was more than 126%. During the year of war, Ukrainians lost their jobs at a frantic pace, with an average unemployment rate of 26%. At least 109 large and medium-sized enterprises in Ukraine suffered direct losses, totaling $13 billion. Industrial giants suffered the most. Ilyich Iron and Steel Works of Mariupol, Azovstal, Motor Sich and the Nibulon ship repair plant.
You're watching Spotlight Ukraine, and this is high time to ruin the Russian propaganda. And here's my co-host tonight. His name is Ruslan Deynychenko. He's an executive director of StopFake. Hello and welcome.
Hello.
So we've selected 3 cases of Russian propaganda, and let's stick to the first one. So the Russian media claim that Volodymyr Zelensky embezzles $400 million the U.S. has funded to Ukraine to pay for diesel fuel for the Ukrainian army. Kremlin propagandists cite the article of an American journalist whose name is Seymour Hersh. What are the proofs he uses? Let's see.
Seymour Hersh assures that Ukraine is buying Russian fuel with discounts, although the USA has given financial aid for Kiev to purchase the resource.
Zelensky's been buying discount diesel from the Russians, one knowledgeable American intelligence officer told me, and who's paying for the gas and oil? We are.
Hersh's opinion was quickly spread by the Russian media as news. However, a journalist declared Ukraine's cooperation with Russia during the war baselessly and did not provide any reliable facts. Even an anonymous whistleblower is confused in his data about corruption in Ukraine. Moreover, American auditors and the White House have repeatedly stressed that they found no significant violations by Ukraine in the use of Western weapons and financial aid.
My office has received 178 reports related to Ukraine. This is a 556% increase in reports from the previous 11-month period. To date, we have no serious criminal findings associated with USAID assistance to Ukraine. This increase in reporting, however, shows that our outreach is working, and that individuals know how and who to report potential misuse of USAID funds to.
On January the 31st, the U.S. Treasury Department said it had no indication that U.S. funds had been misused in Ukraine, but would continue to work closely with Ukrainian authorities to ensure appropriate safeguards were in place to avert corruption.
So why, despite the lack of the facts, even the representatives of the foreign mass media spread this misinformation? Mr. Deynychenko.
Let me remind you that Samuel used to be a very famous American journalist, but now he is very old and he is a retired journalist. And Russian propaganda likes such kind of sources. He cannot be accountable for what he says, and we cannot fact-check his statements because, again, he uses anonymous sources, and Russian propaganda uses him as an American source, so assuming that he is a reliable source. But, well, it's difficult to fact-check him, but the number of instances that he appears on Russian television shows us that it's probably his own agenda. We don't know why he is on Russian television so often, but again, we suspect that it's not for free.
Can we state that he is just out of his profession, Mr. Hersh, and it's not because of his age, because it's a bit ageism. So he's just out of the professional journalism job, as far as I'm concerned, right?
Yes, and this is not the first time when Russian propaganda uses him as a source. Let me remind you that a couple of months ago, he made a statement that it was American Secret Service behind explosion of Nord Stream 2 gas pipelines in the Baltic Sea. Mm-hmm. And again, no evidence so far, but he was very popular on Russian TV shows.
Thank you. Let's switch to the second case. So the Hague Court ordered Russia to pay $5 billion to Ukraine's state-owned oil and gas company Naftogaz for damages in temporarily occupied Crimea. So the legal dispute lasted for 7 years so far, and now Kremlin media says that Russia will not suffer any financial losses. But will they? Let's see.
A politicized decision aimed at legitimizing the plunder of Russian assets already illegally seized by Western countries, and we still need to figure out the correctness of the interpretation on the part of Naftogaz.
This is how Russian politician and the current leader of the right-wing populist Liberal Democratic Party of Russia, Leonid Slutsky, reacted to the court's order. Besides, Russian media state that the Kremlin strives to return all frozen assets and cannot be forced to pay Ukraine's company.
Yes, the assets of the Russian central bank were frozen, for example, in European banks, but any extraction of funds from these assets and transferring them to someone will be theft of someone else's property, Maria Yarmush, a lawyer in international law, said.
However, such arbitral awards can be enforced. If Russia refuses to voluntarily enforce the court's decision, Naftogaz is entitled to start the process of enforcement of the decision on the territory of those states where Russia's assets are located.
So why do the Russian media continue to assert Russia's inviolability, even when it comes to the court decisions?
Well, again, according to Russian propaganda, Russia cannot lose and Putin cannot lose. They always win. Yep. So even any sanctions that the Western countries implement against Russia, Russian propaganda says they are useful and Russia just benefits from them. And let me remind you that several years ago, Russia denied that it will pay Naftogaz according to decision of Stockholm court. But just a few years later, they paid it anyways. So let's see what's happened.
There is a line in this song, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger," but this is not Russia's case, actually.
Exactly.
Okay, but here's another case which is connected with our neighbors. So, Hungarians in Ukraine ask Budapest to protect them from the Ukrainian genocide. This is the quote by Russian media, who launched another fake about the disintegration of Ukraine. More details right now in Spotlight Ukraine.
Petro Hetsko, head of the International Center Matrica for Ruthenians, turned to Russian President Vladimir Putin with a proposal in the context of forcing Ukraine to peace and federalization of the lands to transform the western regions of Ukraine into Carpathian Rus.
The author of the article, Petro Hetsko, does not represent the interests of Rusyns in Ukraine. Now he lives in Russia. Moreover, Hetsko has been wanted since 2014 for the encroachment on the territorial integrity and inviolability of Ukraine. Meanwhile, Carpathian Ruthenians condemn any statements made by Hetsko.
We Carpathian Ruthenians in Ukraine fully support our President Volodymyr Zelensky and the armed forces where many Ruthenians serve and condemn any illegal aggression against Ukraine.
In 2019, the court found Hetsko guilty of committing actions aimed at forcibly changing or overthrowing the constitutional order or seizing state power and sentenced him to 12 years in prison.
So what is the main message or purpose of spreading such misinformation for propagandists?
I think the main purpose of this narrative to ruin our relations with our neighbors, with Hungary, Poland, Romania, with countries who support us. In case of with Hungary, they are pretty successful, of course, because of Hungarian government. Who have a special position to Ukraine. Mm-hmm. They try to persuade the Hungarians that there is a genocide against Hungarians in Ukraine, that Ukrainian government does not allow them to speak their native language. They don't allow to open Hungarian language schools.
Yeah, there is oppression of Hungarians in western parts of Ukraine, yeah.
Absolutely. And well, it's the purpose is to ruin our relations with our neighbors, to make them their governments to provide help to Ukraine more difficult. And in case of Hungary, as I said, they were pretty successful.
But they will not be successful as long as you do your job successfully 24/7. And thank you for that. StopFake and the executive editor, Ruslan Deynychenko, was the guest of Spotlight Ukraine. And see you next week. And that's all for today. Thank you for watching. And do not forget to like, share, and subscribe on our official YouTube channel, Espreso TV Spotlight Ukraine. See you next week. And до побачення.